Pleasure to share with you this morning, and that is the Christmas book. Now, the Christmas book may look to you like a shabby old exercise book, but what's written on its pages is absolutely essential to the smooth running of the festive period in our household. Because the Christmas book is a planning and management tool, the like of which Steve Jobs and Bill Gates could only imagine. It gets opened every year around mid-October, and it's multifunctional. It's a present tracker, it has a list of family members and 3 columns next to each name. A column recording what they were bought last year, so that you can avoid the cardinal sin of buying someone a thing that they already have. A second column to draft up ideas for this year's presents, and a third one in which to record what you've bought them. It also has a page for logging who's due a thank you letter after Christmas, and to check off when that thank you letter's been written. And there are other pages which relate to Christmas food, what's going to be served at which meal, from Christmas Eve to Christmas Day to Boxing Day. And when it gets nearer to Christmas Day itself, it has space for a cooking timetable. What time each dish needs to be prepared by, when it needs to go in the oven, how long it needs to cook for, and when everything needs to be served. And, well, you get the drift. It's the kind of military planning and discipline that you might expect from the daughter of a colonel in the British Army. But without it, I couldn't stand up here and look as smug as I do with regard to our Christmas readiness. Although as I was looking through it before the service, I noted that I do need to get the turkey at 12:30 this lunchtime, so I better not forget to do that, otherwise I'll mess the whole thing up. But our reading from Luke's Gospel this morning tells a story of Christmas planning on an altogether different scale. Earlier in this first chapter, Luke's already described how the angel Gabriel visited the priest Zechariah to tell him that his wife Elizabeth would shortly fall pregnant with a child who would grow up to be John the Baptist, even though she was elderly and hadn't previously been able to have children. And now 6 months on from there, Gabriel gets sent again by God, this time to Mary, to tell her that she too will fall pregnant with a child, even though she is still a virgin and not yet married. And in the first of these visits, Gabriel is delivering a plan that's both short-term and long-term, both retroactive and prospective. In the short term, in just 9 months, he tells Zechariah, your wife will give birth to a son, so go home and get ready for that. But in the longer term, over the next 30 years or so, your son will grow to be great in the sight of God and bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. And he'll do this by harking back some 900 years or so, by moving in the spirit and power of the great prophet Elijah. He will prepare the way for the Lord to come to his people. And then 6 months later, Gabriel visits Mary and gives her similar news which also looks back across the history of the Israelites, as well as looking forward, first to the short term, and then to the medium, and then the long term. In the short term, Mary will conceive by the Holy Spirit and give birth to a baby. In the medium term, that baby will grow up with the name Jesus. He will become great and recognized as the Son of God. But harking back in history, his story will connect with those of David and before him Jacob, hundreds of years before Mary was born. And projecting forward into the future, he will rule over a kingdom that will have no end, that will literally be infinite. And within both of these messages, there's an extraordinary sense of a giant cosmic plan, a consistent and unbroken thread that stretches backwards and forwards from the single moment in time when the angel speaks to the 2 women. And it's a thread that we can identify across the different books of the Bible, because it runs through and connects the lives and stories of all those who appear in it, in Old and New Testaments. And it's one that's recognized by those who are most in touch with God, who hear his voice and appreciate his vision for his creation, and so are able to describe it for those around them. It's a thread that's there right at the beginning, when the light comes into the world for the first time and shines in the darkness. The light that will be recognized billions of years later through the witness of Elizabeth's son, as we're told at the beginning of John's Gospel. It's the same thread that's manifest in the covenant with Abraham in the book of Genesis, that all nations on earth will be blessed by the nation that his descendants will become. The same thread through which Jacob is promised that he and his offspring will also be a blessing to all peoples on earth. the same thread through which the covenant is renewed with Moses after the Israelites have been rescued from slavery in Egypt. It goes on to connect the stories of the Israelites' establishment in the Promised Land, the rule of the judges, and then the first kings, Saul and David. And while it's constantly threatened with breakage, as the Israelites are consistently unfaithful and fail to fulfill their side of the covenant, it never actually breaks. It just attenuates and it changes colour, glowing furious red in the words of the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea and Micah, Zechariah and Malachi, as the rise of the nation envisaged by the promises to Abraham, Jacob and Moses is stalled by the waywardness of its rulers, and then reduced to a remnant by the hostile action of powers such as the Assyrians, Babylonians and Persians. And the time frames across which this thread spins out are immense. It's estimated that Abraham lived around 1900 BC in what's known as the Middle Bronze Age. The arrival of the Israelites into the Promised Land was around 1200 BC, and the kingships of Saul and David around 1100 or 1000 BC. And ancient history and archaeology tell us that the kingship of Solomon and the building of the temple in Jerusalem took place in the mid-900s. And we know for sure that Israel was overrun first by the Assyrians and then by the Babylonians and Persians between 722 and 537 BC. So when Gabriel visits Elizabeth and Mary in what we'd now reckon to be around 4 BC, the thread that he's holding is already well over 2,000 years old. And that's just in terms of recorded history, let alone the eons prior to that, which go back to the creation of the world. But already in Gabriel's mind, or more correctly, in the mind of the God who sent him, the future extent of the thread is already mapped out as well. They already know how the story will continue and the parts that these two women will play in it. And as a little illustration of that, in Luke chapter 1, there's an exchange between Gabriel and Mary, which is easily overlooked but very telling. And there's one version of this story, and it's one that's reflected in the Ave Maria that we've just heard, which says that when Gabriel meets Mary for the first time, the one English translation says that he calls her blessed, something which the verse 29 tells us disturbs Mary, and she wonders what kind of greeting this is, which seems like an odd reaction, doesn't it? Why would you find it disturbing if somebody called you blessed? Wouldn't that be a good thing to be called? But the original Greek word that Gabriel uses doesn't mean blessed. It's not the same word, for example, that Jesus uses in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, "Blessed are the poor in heart, blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacemakers," so on and so forth. The word that Gabriel uses actually means you are spoken well of, or you are of high repute, which perhaps explains Mary's consternation, because she's actually a person of pretty lowly repute. She's just a young girl in a not very important city out of the way in Galilee. In society terms, she's a nobody. She has no real status. She isn't spoken of by anyone, let alone spoken well of. So why would the angel call her that? Well, what Gabriel is offering Mary is the perspective of someone who, like God, sits outside of linear time. Someone who's privy to the past, the present and the future, all within the same purview. Someone who has access to knowledge about everything that has happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen, all at once. Someone who knows, therefore, that Mary's name may not be great at this moment, but it will be within a comparatively short period of time. And she will be highly spoken of by millions, if not billions, of people in the succeeding centuries as the thread that he's holding continues to unwind. And Mary may be temporarily disturbed by the angel's greeting, but she isn't fazed at all by what he says next. In fact, she only has two things to say. And the first is a simple question of mechanics. How will this happen because I'm still a virgin? To which Gabriel says, "Don't worry, there's nothing that God cannot do." And Mary has no follow-up question. In those few words, she's heard everything that she needs to know. And the second thing that she says is an equally simple statement of compliance. She says, "Look at me, and what you see is a servant, a slave girl of God. May everything that you have said come to pass." And we know how the story goes on from there, don't we? Through this unremarkable young girl, Mary, and through her equally unremarkable but equally faithful and obedient cousin Elizabeth, the narrative arc of God's purpose for his world continued, and the way was prepared for his son through the ministry of John the Baptist. And the course on which the world was headed was altered through the ministry of Jesus. And every one of us was offered a new opportunity to live in a right relationship with God, if only we recognise and buy into what Paul calls in his letter to the Romans, the mystery hidden for ages past, now revealed and made known by the command of the eternal God. So as we prepare to celebrate the memory of these world-changing events, what can we learn from these verses? I think one thing is that delivery of the plan is not yet complete. Gabriel told Mary that Jesus would reign in future over a kingdom that has no end, either in time or space. And so we have the opportunity to play our part in the plan, to grasp hold of the thread that's unspooled over billions of years and help to tease it out still further. We have the chance to weave our own lives around it so that through its warp and our weft, we create a tapestry on which people can see a picture of God's kingdom come. And as we do that, we should be mindful of the example that was set for us by Mary. Mary, who will have dreamed of how things would be when she was married to Joseph, who will have had plans for their life together, but who was prepared to drop them all when the angel came calling. Who recognised that her first priority was to be as obedient to God as a slave girl to her master. Who simply accepted without hesitation the role that she was being offered in the great story that had started at the very beginning of time. And who took the angel at his word when he said that God would fix everything and she didn't need to worry about how. So my prayer for us this morning is this. May we never be so wrapped up in our own plans that we don't recognise God's call. May we be ready to give ourselves to his purpose in awareness that we are custodians of the thread in much the same way as Mary and Elizabeth were. May we have the same trust in God that Mary had, the same confidence that whatever she was asked to do, God had his reasons for asking, and they would be good, and he would equip her with whatever she needed to fulfill her role. And this Christmas, may we celebrate the arrival of the one who gave everything to bring about God's purpose, the one whose kingdom will never now end. In Jesus' holy name, amen.